Nancy worked at one of the high-end hair salons in the city. She was one of the best hairstylists there. She aspired to eventually transition into the movie industry. She grew up with her sister Vanessa, who worked as a financial analyst in a bank. Vanessa didn't really like the fact that Nancy worked at a hair salon. Are you going to do someone else's hair for the rest of your life? Don't you want to try something else? But Nancy loved her job. She had worked at the salon for 4.5 years. The management loved her. She would always leave clients satisfied with the result. Nancy, you have to go to school and get a decent degree, Vanessa often lamented. Sister, you know that a degree is not the only option in life. I enjoy my work, Nancy replied. The more you stay there, the harder it'll get for you to actually become someone in life, her sister said. Well, let's see where this takes me, Nancy answered indifferently. She had gone to school once. It was at the beginning of her career as a hairstylist. She couldn't handle the constant mockery from her peers when they discovered she came from the beauty industry. She realized she was way better off doing what she loved. Nancy was a fast learner though. She still had so much to discover. It was the prom day at the local school and Nancy was expecting a lot of clients that day. But she woke up late because her alarm didn't go off for some reason. She quickly got dressed and hurried to work. Nancy knew she wasn't going to have a lot of time for lunch, so decided to grab a sandwich from the diner nearby. As she came out with a paper bag that had a warm sandwich that she would eat on the way to work, she spotted a homeless man sitting on the ground nearby. She felt a pang of sadness in her heart as she realized that this man had likely been living on the streets for a long time. His hair was unkempt and his face was dirty, but his eyes were kind and gentle. As she approached him, she noticed that he was shivering in the cold and his clothes were tattered and worn. "Excuse me, sir? I'm sorry to bother you. Would you like a sandwich?" Without getting a response, she reached into her paper bag and pulled out the sandwich. She handed it to the man and watched as his eyes lit up with gratitude. "Thank you so much," the man said and began to eat the food hungrily as if it had been days since he had last eaten. Nancy realized she was getting really late and thought she would survive somehow without food until the afternoon, so she didn't go back. She hurried to her car, got in, and started to drive. Before she got on the highway, she looked at the homeless man and saw how 2 teenage boys were pulling his long overgrown hair and laughing. She couldn't bear to see the man being bullied like that, and her heart ached for him. She got angry and swung her car back to the parking lot. She knew what it was like to be teased and picked on, and it broke her heart to see someone else being treated like that. Without hesitating, she walked over to the boys and sternly told them to stop. "What do you guys think you're doing, huh? What did he do to you? Get out of here, you pricks. Go get lost." "Sir, I'm sorry to bother you again. Look, I work not far from here. I'm a hairstylist. Can I give you a haircut?" The poor man looked up at Nancy. He was hesitant about what to say. "I'd love a haircut, but I'm dirty and... look at me." "Don't worry about that. That's not a big deal." Nancy helped the man get up and led him to the car. As they came into the hair salon, everyone stared at Nancy and the man. "Nancy? Who is that?" Tina asked. "This is Mr. Coleman. We're getting him a nice haircut today," Nancy replied. "Are you out of your mind, Nancy? You've got 5 girls waiting for you. They've got their prom." Tina was outraged. At that point, Chelsea walked into the hall. She was in charge of the place temporarily. The manager, Olivia, left for the fashion show and had asked Chelsea to make sure the salon operated smoothly. "Sir, why don't you go to the Hair for Homeless? They're actually a few blocks from here. This place is not for someone like you. And Nancy, before you bring him over here, why don't you ask me first?" "Oh wow, Chelsea. Are you really saying this in front of this man? I'm sorry, I brought him here, okay? I'll give him a haircut and he will leave." Nancy was upset. "Who's going to pay?" Chelsea asked. "What do you mean? I'll do it for free," Nancy replied. "Yeah, but you still need to pay though. It's not your hair salon and you can't do whatever you want here," Chelsea said. "Sure, I will pay. Don't worry, Chelsea." Nancy was getting angry now. "Gosh, he stinks. Can someone open the window?" Chelsea quickly walked away, pinching her nose. "That's it. I can't take it anymore. Chelsea, get over here." Nancy was furious. She walked over to Chelsea and stood right in front of her face and screamed. "You have no right to speak like that. I'm gonna pay for him. He'll get his haircut and leave. Now go and apologize." "You brought that bum. I'm not gonna apologize for anything. Am I wrong, girls?" This guy stinks and look at his clothes. He probably hasn't showered for years. This place is a high-class hair salon. We've got wealthy clients and you can't just bring in bums from the streets. Nancy was shocked. She realized there's not much she could do to convince them to listen to themselves. She decided to just quietly do her job without paying attention to what they were saying. When she turned around, Mr. Coleman was gone. She ran out and saw him walking away. She caught up with him and said, "Mr. Coleman, come back. Let's go back inside." "Sweetheart, I'm so grateful for what you've done. I don't need a haircut. I don't want to cause you any trouble," he replied. "Mr. Coleman, you're going to cause me trouble if you don't come back. Don't listen to those girls. They're just different." Nancy convinced him to come back and proceeded to cut his long hair. The only person who didn't say anything but just smiled was an old lady, Mrs. Jones. She was a janitor in the salon. She smiled at Nancy and just nodded to her. As she passed by her, she quietly whispered, "There sure will be an action when Olivia returns, but you did the right thing," Mrs. Jones assured Nancy. In about an hour, Nancy was done. As he looked in the mirror, Mr. Coleman couldn't believe his eyes. The old man staring back at him had been transformed into a handsome, distinguished gentleman. As Mr. Coleman stepped out into the street, he felt like a new man. He walked down the street with his head held high, feeling confident and proud. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was truly living again. He had forgotten how good it felt to take pride in his appearance and to feel good about himself. Nancy was really proud of her work. After all, she truly enjoyed making people happy and seeing them smile again. As they walked back to the salon, Mr. Coleman shared the story of how he ended up in the street. He became homeless a few years ago when his marriage broke up. He had taken on a big mortgage and the interest rate went up. He became overstretched when his marriage ended. He had lost an income, then his job at a boatyard. He was falling further and further behind with his debt repayments. He wasn't aware of his mental meltdown. He began drinking too much and soon got hooked. He thanked Nancy for her kindness. She gave him some cash she had in her wallet and her card. She didn't promise much, but asked him to give him a call if he needed to talk. That day, Nancy came home exhausted from doing hairs for all the prom girls. In the morning, a phone call woke her up. It was Mrs. Jones calling. She told Nancy that when Olivia came back from the fashion show, Chelsea told her everything about last night, and Olivia wasn't happy. For the first time in 5 years, Nancy didn't feel like going to work, but she decided to go and explain everything to Olivia. "I told her that bum is going to ruin our reputation as one of the best hair salons in the city, but she wouldn't listen," Chelsea was telling Olivia in the office. Olivia came out into the main hall. Her face twisted into a scowl as she looked at Nancy. Her eyes blazed with anger and frustration, and her tone was harsh and accusatory. "Who is that man?" she demanded. "Do you know him? Why did you bring him here?" "Olivia, I'm really sorry. I just felt sad for the man, and this is all I could do to him. I'm sorry I used your hair salon for that," Nancy said. "This is a business place, not a charity organization. I'm gonna have to fire you. I'm gonna have to withhold your paycheck for the week too. It'll go towards covering the expenses for the cleaning." "What cleaning?" Nancy was confused. She was shaking. "I'm gonna have to find a job now. I'm not even getting my paycheck for the week." "Don't worry, there are plenty of places you can go to work. They'll take you in right away. You're professional." "Yeah, but I'm not so sure about that. Chelsea promised to make my life miserable. She's probably already calling her friends and telling them not to hire me. I think I'm gonna move to another city or something." Meanwhile, Olivia stood in the bustling hair salon. She couldn't help but feel a twinge of regret. She had always been a bit harsh with Nancy, and now she was starting to realize that her actions had consequences. As she tried to explain to the clients that Nancy had left without leaving any information, she could see the disappointment on their faces. Nancy had been a beloved stylist in the salon, with a loyal following of clients who trusted her. As she watched the clients file out of the salon, she noticed a man putting down a sack with plastic bottles by the front door. A moment later, he walked in. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, looking him up and down. "This is a woman-only salon, and even if it weren't, we don't allow homeless people in here." Mr. Coleman's face fell, and he looked down at the bouquet in his hands. "I understand," he said quietly. "I just wanted to thank Nancy for what she did for me." "Nancy doesn't work here anymore," Olivia said coldly. "But if you give me the flowers, I can make sure that she gets them." "Thank you so much. I guess I'll leave the flowers here," Mr. Coleman said and left. "That's the bum she brought in yesterday," Chelsea chimed in. That's what I figured. Alright, get to work, girls, Olivia said. As Mr. Coleman was walking away from the salon, he suddenly had a nagging feeling that he recognized Olivia's face. He couldn't quite place it, so he decided to turn back and ask for her name. He walked back into the salon and approached Olivia. I'm sorry to bother you again, but is your name Olivia? He asked politely. Olivia, who was in the middle of helping another client, looked up at him, her face void of emotion. Yes, it is. What about it? She replied with a hint of irritation in her voice. Mr. Coleman then mentioned that he used to work for her father at the boatyard, hoping it would jog her memory. Suddenly, Olivia's expression changed. It was as if a light bulb went off in her head as she finally recognized Mr. Coleman. He was the man who had saved her life when she was just a young girl. She couldn't believe it had taken her so long to realize who he was. I'm so happy you're doing great, Olivia, Mr. Coleman said. Olivia was overcome with emotion as Mr. Coleman revealed the truth about his firing from the boatyard. She had always assumed that her parents had treated him well after he had saved her life, but the reality was far from what she had imagined. She felt guilty for not having thanked him earlier and for not having realized the impact of her actions on his life. Mr. Coleman's response, however, surprised her. Despite having lost his job and being falsely accused of theft, he refused to dwell on the past and instead focused on the present. He showed a remarkable level of forgiveness and understanding towards Olivia, telling her that the past was the past and that she had already paid him back for his kindness through Nancy's help. Olivia was moved by Mr. Coleman's grace and humility. She apologized once again for everything and asked if there was anything she could do to make it up to him. Mr. Coleman simply asked her to hire Nancy back, who had lost her job for giving him a haircut. Olivia immediately agreed, realizing that this was the least she could do to repay both Mr. Coleman and Nancy for their kindness. Chelsea, who stood nearby, overheard the whole conversation. She found herself in a perplexing situation as she realized Mr. Coleman's true identity. She had called him a stinking bum just the day before, and now she realized that she needed to change her position quickly. In an effort to make amends, Chelsea began speaking kindly to Mr. Coleman, expressing her gratitude for the good deed that the girls had done in helping him. She also began praising the girls for their act of kindness, telling Olivia how wonderful it was that they had shown compassion towards a homeless man in need. Olivia wasn't paying attention to what Chelsea was saying. She was in the middle of dialing up Nancy's number. When Nancy picked up, Olivia explained everything to her. Nancy was surprised to hear that the man she had helped was actually the same man who had saved Olivia's life when she was just 5 years old. Nancy listened intently as Olivia spoke about how fate had brought them all together like this. Olivia apologized again and again for firing her without understanding the situation. Words. After a moment of silence, Nancy finally spoke up. You know, Olivia, I didn't do it for the money. In fact, I paid Chelsea to do my job. I did it because I saw a man in need and I just wanted to help. But I already missed working there, so I'd love to come back. Olivia was elated to hear that and immediately offered her job back to Nancy. Then she turned to face Chelsea, who was standing there with her head low, clearly feeling guilty. She could see the remorse in her cousin's eyes and knew that Chelsea was truly sorry for what she had done. I'm really sorry, Olivia. I'm not proud of what I said. I was an idiot, Chelsea said. For a moment, there was silence between them as Olivia contemplated what to do next. She didn't want to hold a grudge against Chelsea. After all, they were family. I appreciate your apology, Chelsea, Olivia finally spoke up. I don't want to fire you. We are family, and I don't want this to come between us. I was wrong too, and we both made mistakes. Chelsea's face lit up with relief and gratitude. Thank you, Olivia, she said. I promise I won't let you down again. I was just so caught up in the moment and didn't think things through. Olivia smiled warmly at her cousin. It's all right. We all make mistakes. What's important is that we learn from them and move forward. Chelsea then looked up at Mr. Coleman and apologized. In the midst of their conversation, Mrs. Jones, who worked as a janitor at the building, interjected with a suggestion. She reminded Olivia that she had mentioned her desire to open a barbershop and suggested that she give Mr. Coleman the opportunity to try it out. Mrs. Jones was sure that the girls would be willing to help him. Jack couldn't help but smile at the suggestion. He had faced many rejections in his search for a job, but now there was a glimmer of hope in his heart that maybe this could be his chance to turn his life around. Olivia smiled. She had a reputation for being fair and compassionate towards others, and she was eager to give him a chance. "We'll start tomorrow," she said with a nod. "I'll have the girls show you the ropes and we'll take it from there. I have a good feeling about this." Nancy and Mr. Coleman's friendship continued to grow stronger. At first, he struggled with the technique and precision required to be a good hairstylist, but Nancy's patience and guidance helped him improve his skills. She even let him practice on her own hair sometimes, which was a brave move, but it paid off as Mr. Coleman became quite skilled in the craft. As Mr. Coleman became more confident in his abilities, Nancy realized that he had a natural talent. Nancy offered to let him stay with her until he could get back on his feet. Her sister didn't mind at all. Mr. Coleman was initially hesitant to accept her offer, not wanting to impose on her kindness, but Nancy was insistent, and he eventually relented, grateful for her generosity. As their friendship continued to blossom, Nancy and her sister began to view Mr. Coleman as more than just a friend or a roommate. His kind and caring nature reminded them of their own father.